In the financial services sector, however, similar deals are being crossed and dotted, with Access Bank making strategic moves of divestment and acquisition in the pension segment of the market. Wrapping up the market week for us here on the show is Ayorinde Akinloye, Associate Investment Research at United Capital. Good evening to you, Ayorinde. Thanks for connecting with us. Let's start with the Seplat story. How is the market digesting the government's cancellation of that roughly $2 billion deal by Seplat?
Yes, thank you very much, boss, for having me on the show. Always a pleasure to be on. So quickly down to business. Regarding the Seplat acquisition, we basically, in terms of trying to gauge how investors have reacted to the news, it's always best to look at what has happened to the share price of the stock, right? And we look at, because Seplat is dual listed in London and also in Nigeria. I think immediately after the release, the news filtered into the public market domain. We saw investors sort of react negatively on the on the London Stock Exchange, and we saw Seplat lose about 7.5% yesterday following the release of that news. And then in trading today, he went further to lose about 5%, 6% during trading, but managed to close a bit higher. In Nigeria, what we saw in terms of reaction from investors, largely again due to the fact that there are rules around how much volume of the stock must be traded before the price can move. So we've not seen a significant price movement on Seplat in the Nigerian Stock Exchange. But what we have seen is we are now seeing more willing sellers. So before the news came into the market, it was more of a buyer's market for Seplat than a seller's market. But following the release of this information, we've seen more people willing to come out to sort of sell some of their holdings in Seplat, right? But what we can say is when we look at it, yes, there has been that bit of negative reaction from investors, but it's not an overwhelmingly negative reaction from investors, right? Because what we are seeing is, despite the fact that some investors are reducing their exposure, we are seeing more people also still try to take advantage of that dip in the market, more or less viewing this bit of sell-off as a dip, largely because of two reasons. One, the fundamental driver of Seplat's performance remains very strong. Oil prices remain very much above $100 per barrel, and production remains fairly decent, even though we have seen a bit of struggle on that front across the entire upstream oil and gas industry in Nigeria. But the fact that prices remain pretty much very high has remained a sort of positive driver of value in Seplat's shares. So that's why we are not seeing, yes, we are seeing negative reaction, but we are not seeing an overwhelmingly negative reaction from investors, right? Then the second reason is because the deal is not totally off the table. Yes, the government has declined approval, but according to the exchange from Seplat Energies yesterday, they confirmed the fact that they are still in negotiation with the government to try and see how they can come to an agreement on that transaction. So yes, we've seen that decline, but it's not something that is totally cast in stone not to happen. But the deal is scheduled to close by H1 2022, so that's by the end of June. So we'll continue to look forward to that time to see when if that transaction would close eventually. But that's where we are right now. It's been negative reaction, but it's not been overwhelming.
Yes, not overdone in the market. If we stick with Seplat, let's stick with Seplat, Ayorinde, with replacing his founding chairman, Ojako, and founding CEO as well, Austin Avuru, with those new appointments. What's the market outlook on those changes?
Okay, yeah, so it's not, for us in the market, it's not something that was unexpected. Around November last year, roughly about 5 months ago, the chairman and the founder of Seplat Energies actually announced that he would be resigning at the next annual general meeting in 2022. So it was an expectation already. There was already a bit of transition in terms of there was already a bit of transition plan in place. on who the next chairman will be and who the next CEO of Seplat will be, and that is what we have seen that's what we have seen actually play out now, right? Because Seplat is one of the companies that are very strong in terms of their corporate governance practices, right? So whenever once they announce once there's a plan for those kind of changes, typically we would get the nod in the market ahead of time. So it's just basically falling in line with what was communicated to the market in November last year, that the chairman, Mr. Ojako, will be resigning as the chairman of the board at the next AGM, and that's what we are seeing play out with the appointment of a new chairman and CEO. So we'll watch how they steer the ship of the company. The Seplat remains a very strong company from corporate governance perspective and from business processes. So that has not changed the confidence of the market in the ability for Seplat Energies to deliver value to shareholders.
From the financial services sector, walk me through this announcement on pension funds divestment and acquisitions by Access Corp. What do we know, briefly?
Yeah, so I think basically it's largely in line with Access Holdings, right? So because we know that it got approval to operate a holdco structure a couple of months back, and all the acquisitions and restructuring that we are seeing in their business structure is something that was largely expected, because there was that need to transition from being just a narrow banking business to trying to expand into other segments in the financial services segment. And that was why we saw them announce that they are going to acquire First Guarantee Pensions, right? But what they did was they decided to divest from the pension custodian that they had earlier investments in. And while there's no official communication from Access Holdco on why they decided to do that, but typically as a market participant, being in the industry for a bit of time, what we've observed is typically it's usually difficult to get a pension license if you already have a pension custodian license. So it's either you have one or the other. You can't have the two, right? That's been what has been sort of the trend within the pension industry. So that's likely the reason why Access decided to divest their pension custodian, sell off their shareholdings in the pension custodian business and focus on the pension business, because they feel the pension business is going to be more of critical to their strategic growth going forward.
Okay, well, thank you, Ayorinde Akinloye, Associate Investment Research at United Capital. Let's leave it there for tonight.